here in the audience.
Can we just turn off her microphone?
Join us, please. So, a little bit about myself. If you don't know me, I'm the director of Jewish Studies here at ASU. But in terms of my career, here's a quick summary. I got my PhD from the Hebrew University. I'm from Israel, was born in Israel, and you can recognize it from my accent, of course. Hebrew University, that's a long time ago, I focused on Jewish philosophy and mysticism, so my PhD is in that area, philosophy and mysticism. One of my BA was also in Hebrew literature. I came to the United States in the late 70s, and since the late 70s, we have a summary here of some of the activities by my professional home, my professional activities. Shall I wait? Come in. So in the United States, I taught at a so we're going to Lisa. Lisa, why don't they see what you have to do something? Let's move to the second. So moving. Okay, here we go. So you don't just have to listen to this at all. So basically,
What's the best place for me to sit?
Oh, you can sit wherever.
My name is Marsha Parker.
You could sit right here if you'd like.
25 years. This is actually my 25th year here to racing. And the areas that they focus on
learning for the church.
Yes. A historian. So even though I studied philosophy, I don't engage it as a philosopher, I engage it more as an intellectual historian, which means that I always look at who are the people who produced the ideas, what were the questions that concerned people at the time, how they handled it. So there's a lot of that you will get from my lectures when you do today's and the next two Wednesdays. So Jewish intellectual history is the primary thing. Then I do a lot of work in the field of religion and science. It's also religion, science, and technology. I work on some issues and what's problematic about technology today. So I've written quite a lot about that. I write a lot about Judaism and ecology or religion and ecology. That's a field. And because I'm a woman and because I'm interested in feminism and gender, I also write on feminism and philosophy. So that kind of gives you a way to identify who I am as an intellectual. Yes. So, okay, let's see. Can you hear me? No. Yes? No? Yes? No? Okay.
So people online
Can you put it up higher?
Put it up. Okay, so can you hear me now?
No.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
And now let's hear what they're saying online, that if they are happy or unhappy. Yes?
Yep, you're
So
good.
we're going?
Yep, you're good.
All right. Okay, so this is what we're going to do today. I'm not going to spend time on the introduction. I'm going to ask you to listen to the lecture that will be sent to you since you're registered. And then we're going to focus basically on Martin Buber. I will try to contextualize the work of Martin Buber. I assume that everybody in the room is familiar with the name Martin Buber. Yes? That's good. We'll speak a little bit about his education, his upbringing. We'll talk about his leadership, spiritual leadership in Germany, more in Germany than in, like became the state of Israel. We'll pay attention to his philosophy of dialogue. I'll say quite a lot about that. Some of the issues related to what he called theopolitics. I'll explain what that is, and we'll conclude by what's his intellectual or cultural impact. So that's the scope of what we're going to do. In terms of what you need to know from the lecture you're going to hopefully listen to when you get it online, I spent time in that lecture explaining the definition of Jewish philosophy. So basically, if you talk about Jewish philosophy, you talk about more systematic thinking about Judaism. So it's how you think about Judaism, not how you perform, how you live as a Jew. But it's really quite complicated, so I won't take time here, but you should know that Jewish philosophy is done in various styles or with various foci. So you can do it exegetically, you can do it through interpretation of text. You can do it more in terms of what I call dialogical, namely how Jews respond to the ideas, to the philosophies of non-Jewish thinkers. Or you can do it as I do it, as an intellectual historian. So you can do it historically. Okay? So that's how you approach Jewish philosophy. In terms of the themes of Jewish philosophy, you're going to have, of course, theological focus. Who is God? What is God? How do we think about God? What does God mean for the Jews? So that's all theology. You can also talk about the world, the physical world, whether you believe the world was created or whether the world was a result of evolution from something. That's also very complicated things. But basically it's God, world, the law, namely the Torah. You cannot be Jewish without thinking that it has something to do with Torah. What Torah means and how you interpret it and what you take out of it, that's open to discussion. You will also, as a Jewish philosopher, have to say something about the meaning of being Israel. What does it mean to be part of what we call Israel? And you'll see that Buber, Kaplan, Soloveitchik, they all gave different answers to that questions. And you will have to say something about what's the proper relationship between Jews and non-Jews, so that leads to ethics. You'll have to say something about that. So all that was explored in great detail in the other lecture, and this is the list of the 3 lectures, 3 lectures, one after the other. So who is Buber? Move it, please. Yes? I didn't see the picture. You're behind. Okay, move on. Yeah. One's next one. One more. Yes. All right. Okay. So here is Buber. The reason I like to show the pictures is that you can see the difference. Probably most of you are familiar with the picture second to from the right. Right? That's the most famous picture of Buber. He's a kind of a sage-looking person, which he truly was. But if you look at the other pictures on the left, you can see a different kind of an individual, a different personality comes through from that picture. And actually, I think those two are very indicative of his personality. I'll say more about it in a minute. The middle one is during his during the 30s, in the 30s, actually the 20s already, and the 30s when he was a major intellectual in Germany and engaged in wonderful activities, educational activities. So this is just to give you something to keep in mind what we're talking about, who we're talking about when we talk about Buber. So in terms of how to summarize, who is this person? Why do we bother? Next please. Why do we bother with Buber? It's very hard to actually tell who Buber was because he was doing so many things. And his scope, his intellectual scope was so impressive. So the best way to start is from the top left. He's a man of letters. It's not just that he's a systematic philosopher. I really like to see him first and foremost as a literary person. He was an author, he was an editor, he was a publisher, he was a translator. He really was a person who worked with text as interpreters of text and as a publisher of text. Marvelous in that regard. He's also a very person who starts his work and thinking Jewishly with the Bible. So there's no way to talk about Buber without thinking about how he made the biblical text. And many of his books are actually interpretations of the Bible. He also mystical streak in him, or mystical kind of orientation. He was a contemplative person. I'll tell you a little bit more about Buber and Hasidism in a few minutes. But keep that in mind, that is part of who he was. And it's amazing how a person who was so contemplative could also be a person who was a public figure, a really major public figure. And very few people know that he was a poet. He wrote poetry. He wrote poetry especially for his wife. I have to say about her also. And what do you read now? What do we read here? So we have, he's a poet, he's a theologian, he's going to talk a lot about God, but you'll see that the way he talks about God is not so typical way that you would expect. He's going to tell us a lot about religiosity as opposed to religion, okay? And I'll show you what that means. So he's a philosopher also, he's a public intellectual. He was a very active Zionist, one of the early Zionist thinkers in Germany. And you'll see he worked closely with Herzl. He was the editor of the Lude, and a very, very influential Zionist. He was associated with cultural Zionism. He's also a social theorist, and he was an anarchist, a close friend of Gustav Landauer, who was a major anarchist thinker who was murdered in 1919 by right-wing people who were against his position in Germany. All right, so now books by Buber. There are more books, so everything could be fit in on one slide. There are many books, but I think I would like to start with the first one on the left. His first book on Bachman, of Breslau, actually is important because he started by thinking about Hasidism and translating Hasidic tales to the German reader. So why Hasidism was so important for him is an important issue. The next book is actually a book about mysticism, about the nature of religious experience. The first book was on the left this one is from 1909. The second book is from 1913. Then comes the third book, which he's most known for, the Ich und Du, the I and Thou. That's 1923. And we just had a conference in 2023. We had a conference in Haifa University to celebrate the 100 years of that book. So it's an incredibly important book. If you're not familiar with it, I don't have the English translation, of course. I have the two translations, which I'll show you in a minute, also on the slide. But the book was translated into English 1937. That's the first translation. Second translation comes from 1971 or 72 by. Let's see, I can actually find it by Walter Kaufmann, who used to teach at Princeton University. Yeah, 1970 actually, the translation. Anyway, that's the most important, the most famous book, but there's many, many other books. And I highly recommend that people try to read any book that you want. And of course, in English, available to us. Even, let's say, the book Reading Humanism will give you a lot of insight into Buber's thought. That's what I'm trying to make sense of for you. So here is move on. This is Morris Friedman, and American audiences, Jews in America, would not have been able to know as much as they do know about Buber without this person. He used to teach at the University of, San Diego, yeah. University of San Diego, and he became he was a disciple. He's an American. Buber was German, but despite that, he became a disciple of Buber and a person who really popularized Buber for American audiences in English. So these are some of his books, and any book by Morris Friedman will be very useful for you. So do try to get hold of some of them. He was just a marvelous interpreter, very accessible, writes beautifully for the general public, but he was a very well-trained philosopher himself. All right, next we go to the fact that as Karen Armstrong, I don't know if that name rings a bell, but she's not a Jewish historian, she's an intellectual historian, and she said something very insightful, that Buber actually influenced Christians more than Jews. And there's no way to do any serious scholarship on Buber without paying attention to what Christian thinkers said about Buber. So, any of those, when you get the presentation, you can choose which book to read, but I can tell you that I think that the Christian interpreters of Buber are as insightful, as profound as the Jewish interpreters. So here are some, please go to the next one. Okay. If you're going to choose one book for your library, this is the book you want. This is the book you want. It's on the right side. It's by Coleman Destroyer, who used to teach at the University of Chicago for many, many years, also at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And I would like to bring it to your attention because it's from a series, a very, very important series at Yale University Press that has published about 30 or 40 books on various Jewish intellectuals. And I highly recommend that every person who cares about ideas in the Jewish tradition to purchase some books from that series. So this is a book on Buber. Unfortunately, Coleman Destroyer passed away just, I think it was a month ago. But he was a marvelous scholar. So what we get from these Jewish scholars? From Jewish scholars, we get the kind of approach that I represent here. Namely, they think about Buber in terms of how he fits into larger intellectual context. Okay? So they treat him from an intellectual history perspective rather than from psychology or sociology or philosophy or even theology. Each of the books on the slide is worth reading, I'll put it this way. So I'd like to highlight the first one that I already shared. The second one is by Asher Beeman, also an intellectual historian, teaches at the University of Virginia. And this is a collection of primary sources from Buber. So if you say, okay, I don't want to read books by Buber, why can't I just read one book with what Buber said? This is the book to get hold of, the Martin Buber Reader. And these people explain, these historians explain the centrality of Zionism in Buber's thinking. He wasn't just a Zionist, definitely more than what Zionists understood in America, let's say, in the middle of the 20th century. But Zionism was very important, and that's the message of the book of Martin Buber's Theopolitics. That's a book that received an award for the best work on in Jewish philosophy. I think it was in 2019, if I recall correctly. And it's a marvelous book by a person who teaches at the University of Kansas. So Buber really is a very inspiring thinker and very available to all Jews and non-Jews. So in terms of the dimensions of the thought, you can just see the list, and I could have repackaged it slightly differently. But he was a social critic, so he had a lot to say about what's problematic in the way society is organized. He had a lot to say about religious experiences, what happens in religious experience, what's it mean to experience God. He was a political thinker. He was very influenced by Landauer, as I said. He was an anarchist, so a lot of his criticism came from an anarchist perspective. He was very critical, especially of socialism, but also, of course, of any form of authoritarianism. Buber was a major critic. Hasidism was very much how he started his Jewish philosophical thinking, started with Hasidism. I'll say more about that. He was a cultural Zionist. He had a lot to say about psychology, and we'll say more about that when we get to the idea of I-Thou. What does it mean to have an I-Thou relationship? That's a psychological insight, not only, but partially a psychological insight. And it was crucial to Jewish-Christian dialogue, both before the war and after the war. So Buber is, you cannot talk about Judaism in the 20th century without thinking about Buber. Finally, he had a lot to say about the Jewish-Arab relations. We'll get to that. He was very critical of the idea of a nation-state. He argued against Ben Gurion. He did not want to have Israel as a state. He wanted to have Israel as a place in which God rules, not human beings, not politicians. But that gets complicated. But we'll get to that later on. Buber was absolutely a remarkable thinker. So in terms of what he is very known for, he's very known for this idea of dialogue. Or if you want another word, use the word encounter. So what's the key insight here? And that's how I like to always suggest to when students are in the room, go for the key insight. What is it really about? So it's really about relationality. You cannot think about ourselves or like yourself as a person who's a single entity. Everything is interconnected. That's the basic insight of Buber. So the I is never an I without the thou. And the thou, the person, the you, is always connected to the I. So we'll have to say more about that, but the key insight, that's what I wanted to take home with you, is the notion that everything is mutual, based on mutuality and on reciprocity. So it goes against the idea of Descartes, a very important philosopher, who's the founder, in a sense, the foundation of modern philosophy, who always thought about the individual as a single entity who is a thinking entity, right? I think, therefore I am, that's what he's very known for, that slogan, that statement, means that you are really singular. You're really just you as a thinker. Buber says, no, it's not just you, it's you and the other, and what's in between you. What's going on in the dynamics of the relationship between you. So he called that the interhuman, the space between human beings as they interact with each other. And, or you can call it also intersubjectivity. So the subject is never alone. The subject is always together with another subject. So it's subject-subject relationship. Not subject-object, but subject-subject. We'll explore that later on a little bit. Authenticity was very important for him. And in order to be authentic, you have to listen. You have to listen to what the other is saying. You have to listen to yourself. You have to be very open to something outside yourself. So you can see why these ideas are crucial to psychology. Anybody who's done therapy in one way or another, or read about therapy, knows that that's precisely what happens in therapeutic environment. And ideas were articulated by him already in 1923. So that's 100 years ago. Next, here is a summary of the key dates of his life. I like to put the picture next to that. You can see that the stamp that was created, this is a German stamp, was created on the basis of this picture. But we have a list also of his, the key elements of his life. And let's talk for the very beginning. The first 2 dates are important. He was born in Vienna. But very early on, he had a major crisis as a child. Why? His mother eloped with her lover and left him as a child, 3 years old, to basically grow without a mother. Imagine what that does and think how that inspires the idea of dialogical relationship. When the person you're supposed to be so close to, your mother, is not there for you. Years later, when he was in his 30s, he met with his mother, and he described it as a misleading. Something was not connected. So basically, he grew up with his grandfather and the grandfather's wife, Adele. Solomon Buber was his grandfather. I'll show you another slide with a little bit more information, but you cannot understand Buber without realizing that he grew up in a traditional Jewish home school that was very open to the Enlightenment, to the Jewish Enlightenment, to the Haskalah. He also studied in German university or Austrian university, so he begins in Vienna. In those days in Europe, students would take one semester here, one semester there. Really, there was a lot more freedom to move around in European universities. When he writes his dissertation, that's 1904, he focuses on non-Jewish. These are two non-Jewish thinkers. Nicholas of Cusa is from the 15th century, Jacob Böhme is 17th century, but basically he starts with non-Jewish thinkers. Then later on, he is going to get into the Jewish focus, but you can see that the person is evolving. He's always growing, he's always developing. So the next development is going to be his activism. He begins as a Zionist in 1904. Then he's going to be recruited by Herzl to be the editor of a particular journal there. This is really the Divel rather than the Yehuda came later. Sorry, this was my mistake. But basically you can see how he develops his ideas, and he always remains a teacher. He also taught for a while at the University of Frankfurt prior to the rise of the Nazis to power. And when they came to power, he had to resign or he would have been dismissed. And he migrates to Palestine in 1938, which was a very complicated story. But anyway, before he migrated, he really was the spiritual leader of German Jews, 1933, 1938. So those are probably things that you're familiar with, but it's always good to see things in context. This is his grandfather, that's Solomon Buber. The point is that he is exposed to Jewish traditional text, but he does it as a Haskalah, from the Haskalah perspective, from the perspective of Jewish enlightenment. So it's very different from going to an Orthodox yeshiva, even though the lifestyle that he led while living with his grandfather from age 4 to age 14, he basically lives like an Orthodox Jew. It's important to mention it because he's going to move away from Orthodoxy later on in life. When he basically goes bar mitzvah, he reconnects with his father. The father, however, is a scientist. Father is a non-observant Jew, and that's basically what Buber is going to become. He's going to become a non-observant Jew. I'm putting, next please, Lisa. Okay. I'm putting her picture, that's his wife, Paula Winkler, and she's a very interesting intellectual herself. They met as students and at the University of Zurich, and she was really kind of a avant-garde type person. She was a writer, she was a very creative person, and she was very involved in his work trying to make Hasidic texts, Hasidic tales, available in German, because it was first in German, then translated into English, but in German, she was crucial to that project. And she was a very good writer, writing for different audiences, and totally undervalued, underappreciated, but we should pay attention to her. However, she wrote under an assumed name. Geo Munk was her pseudonym, and that's probably why a lot of people don't really know much about her. And she died before he did. She died in a trip. I think it was in Venice, yes, when they were on a long trip, and that's, she passed away. I think it was a pneumonia or some variation thereof. All right, so now let's move on, next. No, this one. Yeah. So big issue is how to understand his religious identity. This is a famous quote: to look away from the world or to stare at it does not help a man to reach God. But he who sees the world in him stands in his presence. So if you're going to choose one word from this quote, what word would that be? Which is the key word in that statement? It's not God. I can tell you that. The key word is the last word, presence. So if you want to get a sense of what Buber was about, is how do we feel the presence of the other? Whether the other is God, in this case it is, in this particular statement, but it can also be to be in the presence of another human being, or to be in the presence of a horse. We have a very famous text in which Buber talks about his relationship with his horse. Where he grew up, he actually had access to it. You can have a relationship with a tree and feel the presence of the tree as much as you feel the presence of the horse or the other human being or God. So it gets kind of complicated. How do we understand this religiosity? So here is, move on please. So here is how, let's look at the first statement that might help us. If to believe in God means to be able to talk about Him in the third person, then I do not believe in God. But if to believe in Him means to be able to talk to Him, then I do believe in God. And that, in a sense, really gets you to the heart of what Buber is about. In that sense, he's not a systematic theologian. He doesn't, or he's not a religious, technical religious philosopher. What he is, he's a person who feels the presence of God. If it were a different kind of class, without things online and without being tied to a particular spot, we could have spent a lot of time trying to make sense of that claim. You can see that a very famous German theologian, Hans Kuhn, also speaks a little bit about that, but you can move on to the next point on the slide. When Buber basically rejected the God, what he called the God of the theologians, but he was very open to the presence of God. Okay? So that's really the thing to keep in mind. God is what he called in his language the eternal thou, the one who is always authentically present in I-thou relationships. So if you have a relationship which is not I-thou, then there's not going to be a presence of God. And he's going to explain the difference between I-thou relationship and I-it relationship. In I-it relationship, there's a lot of, basically, is instrumental relationship. We use another person. We manipulate another person. We want to control another person. That's not good. That's the I-it relationship is what we're doing all the time without even thinking. But God is not going to be in an I-it relationship. God is only going to be present where you're very, very authentic and open and in a real dialogue. So if you take the issue, what's the difference between religion and religiosity? This is a summary of it. Buber did not observe the commandments. He did not live like an observant Jew. He did not go to synagogue, even though he knew the tradition very, very well. And if you want to dismiss it, just remember how many Jews today in America do the same thing. They consider themselves Jewish. They know they're Jewish, but they may or may not even be members of Jewish communities. Okay? So Buber is doing this already many years before us, and I would say that he is by no means alone. What Buber is trying to figure out is a new way of being creative, a new way of thinking about creativity, thinking about how do we get to the truth, but in a non-systematic way. Therefore, he's really truly anarchist. He's a religious anarchist. He doesn't want institutions, he doesn't want positions, he doesn't want bureaucracies, he doesn't want systematization. Where does it all come from? It comes from his exposure to Hasidism. And you'll see a few about that. So if you want to see what is religiosity, think about the biblical prophets. The biblical prophets are not the priests. So Buber is connected to the biblical prophets. He's not connected intellectually or emotionally to the priests, and definitely not to the kings in ancient Israel. Okay, so that's kind of what he's after. He's after religiosity, but not religion. That leads, so next please. That leads us to the difference, or to his insight that when we can talk about revelation is a presence, and it's a very complex. If you tell me, well, I don't really know what you mean by that, or what Buber meant by that. Just think about love. If you are confused about the idea of presence, think about love. That you love to a mother, love to a husband, a friend, and whatever it is. In love, you have the presence, but you don't have systematization of anything. You don't have theology. You don't have nothing is systematized. Yet you know, yeah, I can even love my mother after she's dead, or I can love my husband after that person is no longer here, and so forth. So that's basically how he thinks about revelation. Divine revelation, is the presence of God. So let's look at the second one. In Revelation, man receives what he receives is not counted. So it's not about do X, don't do Y. No, it's about presence. And that presence, very much like love, gives you strength. That's the source of strength. So Revelation does not convey universally valid and generally acceptable piece of knowledge. When he's saying that, he's going to talk against or critically of Reform Judaism. Because Reform Judaism in Germany was about summarizing Judaism dogmatically, or kind of in terms of idea. So the Reformed theologians in Germany spoke about the God idea. And Buber says, don't focus on ideas, on knowledge, on content. Focus on, in a sense, what you feel when you are in the presence of something or someone. And in that presence leads you to action. That's the last line on the slide. So where does it all come from? It comes from his exposure with Hasidism when he grew up with his grandfather, although his grandfather was not a Hasid. Did not belong to Hasidism, but Buber was exposed to Hasidism in that context. And Hasidism, as I'm sure many people know, developed at the end of the 18th century, really blossomed in the 19th century, and of course is still with us today all over the world. So Buber basically takes the idea of Hasidism, the experience of Hasidism, and he's going to, all his life, kind of reflect what this Hasidic life is about. But not as a historian. He's not going to do it as a historian. He's going to do it, okay, what does it all mean? What it all means being in the presence of God. I won't get into the details of all that, but basically, there was a lot of criticism and a lot of internal fight within Judaism. A lot of critics of Hasidism came from the Haskalah movement, from the Jewish Enlightenment movement. And that's in itself a topic that we should probably spend a whole course just on that. So, Buber and Hasidism, here are some of his books when he published, that's over the English version of his books on Hasidism. But if you ask me why is it important, he thought that Hasidism facilitated spirituality for modern Jews. A way to be Jewish in the modern world, even though Hasidism is a critic. Hasidism as a movement was a criticism of modernity in a sense. You say he saw something in it that thought, well, that's the way to go in the modern world. Well, he had a lot of opposition or a lot of criticism for a very famous person, the scholar of Jewish mystical tradition, including Hasidism, Sholem, he went to university, but he was a German Jew. Again, there's this beautiful biography by David Biel. Unfortunately, he too passed away not too long ago. Sholem, of course, passed away in 1982. So, Sholem thought that Buber was a bad scholar of Hasidism. And really was the relationship with him was actually very fraught with tension. Even though they were both quite close to in certain respects. But they divided. They were divided. What is Judaism? How do we study Judaism? What's the role of scholarship, especially historical scholarship? And Buber was not what Scholem was, and vice versa. Scholem wasn't what Buber was. But I'm a product of the Scholem tradition, but in the Hebrew University, you should know if you don't know, Buber was finally brought to the Hebrew University. It was very complex, politically written kind of process, but he was not allowed to teach in the department where I got my PhD. He was allowed to teach in the sociology department. So basically, Scholem, who controlled the university in those years, basically told him, okay, you can go to anthropology and sociology, but don't come to the real thing. And that's the Department of Philosophy. And Jewish mysticism at the time was the same department. Next. So Zionism, or maybe let's go back, I'll go back for a second. Both of them were Zionists, both of them were actually in favor of binationalism. Both of them were on the creation of Brit Shalom, the Covenant of Peace, 1925. Both of them were for binationalist solution, namely two people in one nation. Or one state at least. Sorry, one state is a better way of talking about it. And a lot of people, of course, had a major problem with that. So both Buber and Scholem were on the same page on that issue. That means opening to the Arab population. That means, accepting the fact that the people in Israel, they would call them the Palestinians, that they are a nation and that you have to accommodate their needs. So on that issue, the Jewish community was and still is hotly or highly divided. So Zionism doesn't require a lot of introduction here. Please move on. No, sorry. Yeah. If you don't know the book, The Zionist Idea, I highly recommend it, but it's a wonderful collection of primary sources with excellent introduction by Arthur Hertzberg. And for Buber, the bottom line, go to the end of the last line on the slide, basically for him, Zionism was a utopian experience. It's a path to utopia. And he wanted Zionism, his idea was that Zionism will be the vision to the world. Vision for everybody, not just for Jews. So it's a very, if you call it, you can call it idealistic, you can call it naive, you can call it, but he was not naive, but he was definitely a utopian thinker. How can we create an ideal society in the land of Israel, the land of promise, and of course the land of obligation? That's all part of this concept. The last word on it, it's not on the, I guess you don't have the same one that I have, but anyway. It's about theopolitics, how God, basically the land of Israel, according to Buber, belongs to God. It doesn't belong to human beings. Human beings are only there temporarily, and they have to protect the land from being misused, especially in terms of ethical and moral relationship with each other. So Buber was quite an interesting thinker. As you know, there are various visions of Zionism. Buber belongs to, you can put Buber in the category of cultural Zionism. He was close to Hava, close to Bialy, close to other people in that vein. But clearly, he was also different from anybody else. Buber was a unique voice, and you cannot really reduce him to any category. But if you need to understand the richness of Zionism, that's where it fits in. Here are some of the various pictures. You of course know Herzl. Herzl presents political Zionism. Ahad Ha'am, the next person doing it, that's cultural Zionism. Weizmann, also kind of political Zionism, but also pragmatic Zionism. Arthur Rubin, Ben Gurion, and Rav Kook. So, that's Rav Kook. That's a Rav Kook, who was a religious Zionist, not religious Zionist, he was a religious person who accepted Zionism on his term, on religious terms. And of course, Ben Gurion, everybody knows Ben Gurion. So I'll skip those, some basic information about Judaism, about Zionism that you all know, and I'll go to the next one, go to the Cohen next. Yeah. So Hermann Cohen was the most important philosopher in Germany died in 1918. Herman Cohen was a Kantian thinker. He really made Kantianism kind of come back to life. Died already in 1804. But when Cohen made Kantian thought very crucial to German life, but basically he thought that Judaism is in agreement, 100% agreement with Kantianism. And there was a difference between Cohen. Cohen was anti-Zionist. He thought that Zionism really went the wrong way. He thought that these people, he was reported to have said that, oh, these guys, they want to be happy. So Zionism, he dismissed Zionism as a way to live life. Buber, on the other hand, did not dismiss Zionism. He thought that Zionism could be the closest we can come to the ideal society. But obviously, between Zionism, between the idea of Zionism or the idea of Zion, what Zion is about, and the reality of life in Palestine in the early 20th century, that there was quite a difference between the two. But he honestly believed that you can live in Palestine and create a new reality. If you don't know the book on the run, I have it here. Where is it? Here. So that's a very important book edited by an explorer. A lot of his speeches about Zionism, about relationship with Arabs, is available in this book. A Land of Two People. The subtitle is Martin Buber on Jews and Arabs. So I highly recommend that book because now we're still struggling with the same issues. And Buber definitely offered a way to go. But it was a complicated way to go because Buber did not agree that Israel should be a state. A long time he feuded with Ben-Gurion. In the end, Ben-Gurion, or political Zionism, had the upper hand. Buber was the marginal position or the losing position. But that doesn't mean that he was entirely wrong. It means that we have to figure out today, I'm saying it in parentheses, how to integrate political Zionism with the insights of Buber, and maybe that will get us out of the conundrum that we are living through. Here are some of his ideas. I wanted to really imagine him. That's not the same. Somehow we're on the same. Exactly. I don't know which version.
Sorry, I guess
Yeah. So he was a public. Okay, this one. He was a public intellectual, and he really was an educator. So you cannot really underestimate the impact of Buber for education. I won't get into the details of it, but just keep in mind that he helped people to think through why education is the path to flourishing, to human flourishing, and how important education is for all of us. So I think that many of his educational insights are very much on target. This is Rosenzweig, his close friends. It was because of Rosenzweig that Buber managed to get a position at the University of Frankfurt. Buber was not an academic in that regard, but Rosenzweig helped him to get there. But the relationship is important because they spent a lot of time. They started, but Rosenzweig died in the middle, or in the beginning rather. They started the project of translating the Bible into German, to modern German. And that translation is a very important, but also tragic project, because when Rosenzweig died in 1929. Buber continued to work on it. By the time he published it, there was no German Jewry to read it. So as far as what he is as an educator, move on please. As an educator, he's trying to expand the scope of the Jewish bookshelf, as we call it now in Israel. Which books Jews should read, and how reading philosophy and sociology and political science or political theory is good, as important to the Jewish experience. That's what he's trying to do. And he's trying to really inspire different kinds of creativity. Remember that in the beginning of the 20th century, Jews were deeply interested in acculturation. They did not want to think about being Jewish. They wanted to be Germans. They wanted to be, in America, the same thing. They wanted to Americanize. So one of the things that Buber brings to us is how to be both at the same time. How to be a acculturated person, educated person, but also very much involved with Jews and Jewish thinking. That's really what he's trying to do, and it succeeded to a great extent because of his work as an educator. This is, I won't get into this, his relationship with Gustav Landauer, but that relationship is crucial that relationship is crucial to the ideas of Buber about anarchism. So the best, if you want one phrase to describe Buber was a religious anarchist in many ways. So this is a book that I mentioned on a previous slide. It's a terrific book, really. Please, next one. Yeah, that's right. So this is the next, this book is very important. Theopolitics is a form of religious anarchism. It's how God is the true king. Right? So when Buber wrote his work, The Kingship of God, 1932, he's actually arguing against a very important German philosopher called Schmidt. And he's telling, it's all about, it's not political theology, which is what Paul Schmidt was about. It's about theopolitics, how God should rule, and not bureaucrats, or not kings, or not priests, or not anybody else. So it's not easy to live religious as a religious anarchist, but that's what Buber was all about. I'm trying to get to the, I want us to spend some time on his philosophical ideas. And basically, Buber, I would say, take a look at the one at the bottom on the left. Buber aspired to the study of the fullness, the wholeness of the human being. So he doesn't want to talk only about cognition. He's going to talk about cognition and about emotions and about interaction and about embodiment. It's all part of what it means to be a human. So he has a famous book, Between Men and Men, so that's why you can see how those ideas are going to be very appealing to many psychologists and sociologists. But you cannot think about Buber, or you can think about psychological insights without mentioning Buber today. Now let's say a few words about I and Thou. That's his most famous book. And this is the beginning. The basic word I and Thou can be spoken only with one's whole being. The concentration and fusion into the whole being can never be accomplished by me, can never be accomplished without me. I require a Thou to become. Becoming I say Thou. So I can never be just me alone. I'm always connected. There's always this duality of I, Thou. So here's a kind of a diagram to put it all nicely, based on what it says in the book. So it's through the Thou, a person becomes an I. You are not fully who you are except through relationship. And the relationship means that there's only part of the relationship are not overlapping. You are not fusing with another person. You are always separate but overlapping. And a lot has to do on the quality of this, let's call it the intersubjective. What happens between you? So the intersubjective space changes all the time. You can be angry, you can be hateful, you can be dismissive. That's going to affect the quality of the intersubjective. But remember, it's all in the in-between. So that's the opening. And I'll just read, and you can see, this is of course English translation. This comes from the 1937 translation, but there's a certain poetry to Buber. So to man, the world is twofold in accordance with his twofold attitude. The attitude of man is twofold. in accordance with the twofold nature of the primary words which it speaks. The primary words are not isolated words, but combined words. The one primary word is the combination I, thou. The other primary word is the combination I, it. Wherein, without a change in the primary word, one of the words, he and she, can replace it. Hence, the I of man is also twofold. For the I of the primary word I, thou is different I from that of the primary word I, it. So you can see some people actually suggested a very good musical here. There's the music going on here. There's kind of a poetic, almost magical, right, to this kind of style. I'll go into, because I realize that we have time consideration, but if you look at I now, move please. No, this one? No, that one. Yeah. If you look at the philosophical style, this is very different from regular philosophy. He's not analytical. He's really aphoristic. He's poetic. He's very vocative. He's emotional. And he asks you kind of to position yourself in a certain way in the world. And the person who inspired him in this regard is Rosenzweig. Rosenzweig, whose philosophy is much more difficult than Buber, but the insight of Rosenzweig also influenced Buber. So here is a summary of the difference between the I, thou, and the I relations. Basically, everything that happens to us, you can see that most of the time we're in the I-it interaction. We speak, we don't really listen, but we speak, right? We think in categories. We are going to be much more focused on meaning, definition, but everything is conditional, everything is instrumental, everything is calculated. It's all toward a goal. We move toward a goal. We have no choice but to be an I-it. Most of life is lived in the I-it. You can't get out of it. But ideally, what we should aspire to is the I-thou. When it's dialogical, when it's immediate, when it's direct, unconditional, not calculated. Well, of course, that describes love relationship. So love, in a true love, that's what you have in true love. I, thou. But most of us don't live in that all the time. Actually, we cannot. Even Buber thought that it's impossible to be totally in the I, thou. We have to move, we oscillate between the I, thou, I, it. But every time, if you do manipulate somebody, just think about Buber and say, well, what's wrong with that? I just interacted with somebody as I, it, rather than I, thou. So it's a very, very profound insight how human relations should be. Here are some of the famous quotes from him. I'll just give you the one I love most. It's the one on the right. The it is the eternal chrysalis, the beautiful image, eternal chrysalis. The thou, the eternal butterfly. So next time you say to somebody, I love you, that's a good thing to keep in mind, right? Except that situations do not always follow one another in clear succession, but often there is happening profound twofold, confusedly entangled. So that's the problem. We never are fully available. We're never fully open. We're never fully interacting with another person. But knowing that, we should aspire to I, thou, even though we cannot be in I, thou all the time. In terms of Jewish law, that would lead us to what we are going to explore next week. Its relationship to halakha, relationship to law. He was not an observant Jew. And next week, we're going to talk about Soloveitchik, who basically said the only way to God, to experience God, to be in a relationship with God, to be a Jew, to be with other Jews, requires the halakhic structure. So teaching Soloveitchik after Buber is a good thing, because Soloveitchik knew, of course, knew Buber, knew about Buber, knew the Buber's work, but he also shows us a totally different way of being a modern Jew. So I want to spend some time with discussion, so I'm going to skip a few few, but just trying to get to a few quick suggestions to you. Buber was very influential among non-Jews. Look at the bottom, even Pope Francis, our current Pope, in Laudato Si, I praise you. That's his famous document from 2015. He talks about the life of the I-Thou, relationship of I-Thou, and obviously it's a reference to Buber. He had Buber in mind when he wrote that last quote. So in terms of his impact, those are the areas that we should, I already mentioned, these are the areas that we should take into consideration when we think about Buber. These are, within that economy, these are the areas that influence, these are the areas that influence the academic study, especially of religious studies, Jewish studies, biblical studies, all of those fields. People who are in those fields know about Buber. And in the field of education, also very important impact. To be a good educator is not just to transmit knowledge, it's to be present to the student, and the students should be able to be open to the teacher. So it's a different kind of approach to what it means to educate. And I can skip that, but Buber also influenced feminist scholarship quite a lot. And I had quite a lot to say about the relationship with nature, about ecology. That's the topic I spoke about in the conference we had about Buber in July 2023. So now we can end here and pose some questions and answer questions either from you or from the audience. Okay? Does it make sense? Does it sound interesting? Go ahead, questions in the back, yeah.
Oh, I just love the last slide. Can you put the last slide on again, next to the last slide?
Why do we have this, Miss?
I just closed it, so we missed it.
Oh, okay, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
no, she's wrong.
Okay.
Which slide do you like?
It's
The next to the last.
one on
It listed him.
No,
No, the one before that. Influence. Where it talks about what he influenced.
Yeah, that was like the last one.
Okay, well, wait. But maybe you remember which one?
Yeah, it's the next to the last slide.
Okay, so.
There. No, it's the next to the last.
There's multiple.
Go all the way down to the end. Yeah, that was it. That was it. Right before.
The Buber nature?
One more.
No, Buber nature of Afrofeminism, or the one maybe
The one right before that.
Yeah,
There you go. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so what's interesting in that for you?
It's fascinating that he delved into so many areas. And I think I'm not Jewish myself, I am Christian, but I was fascinated by this study because he has influenced Christianity so much. So when I look at all the things he did, I'm just gobsmacked. I'm just blown away. So that's why I like that.
Oh,
You can leave that up first, just a second.
Yeah, let's leave it here. There's no reason to close it. Just leave it. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. He was absolutely fascinating. Actually, if you think his life is very interesting, but one aspect of his life, he was really a workaholic. He really was. He managed to produce so much. The amount of hours, it has there's an economic reason that we don't want to get into it, why he had to produce so much, but he really was working all day long, which actually raises a problem, wait just a minute, raises a problem. How was he in human relations? And the answer, and you're going to hear what Mordechai Kaplan said about that. It's not going to be so complimentary. So I'm just come to the lecture on Mordechai Kaplan, and you're going to hear how Mordechai Kaplan talked about Buber after being around him in Jerusalem. Yes, go ahead.
How Hava, would you talk a little bit about the last at the bottom of the screen, critique of technology?
Technology.
Did he consider technology very systemic and not movable, or why, what do you?
Yeah. So critique of technology is actually a very important theme in Germany during the 1920s, 1930s. But Buber, very much like other German Jewish intellectuals, Erich Fromm, for example, had the same idea. Technology alienates us from each other. Technology doesn't solve problems. It only makes us it forces us into I-it relationship. With our computers, with our smartphones, we have an I-it relationship. It's not an I-thou. That's very problematic right now because all educational institutions moving into AI education. Imagine what would that do to us? What would it do to our youngsters and their children? I'm a major critic, very much in the same vein. I'm a major critic of the move to AI education, but that's what's happening right now. So the Buberian position is usually on the losing end. In the end, he's a loser. People don't follow him. But that doesn't mean that he's wrong or that he was wrong. So, yeah.
So can you talk more about his anarchism? I just think that and his life experience don't make any sense to me.
Oh, the contrary. Okay. So what is anarchism? Anarchism is basically the insight. The insight of anarchism, and we have some sociologists in the room, so maybe they will say something different. But anarchism is basically about small grouping. Living in small groups, knowing each other directly, immediately, and not following bureaucracy. So the anarchist is anti-bureaucratic. That's what Google was. What's the problem? The problem is that in human relations, we don't get things done without institutions. So which community for Buber was the ideal community? Yes, which one? A village, now a community in Palestine. Which one? The kibbutz. So that's where I come from. I come from a kibbutz in Israel. And Buber, so here's the complexity of the name. Buber would come to our kibbutz to speak in Afrikaans, but he never lived in a kibbutz. He was not a kibbutz member. Okay? It's hard to be a kibbutz member. So Buber is a man of ideas, of inspirations, of insights. Living the insights is very difficult. Okay.
So I'm curious about his flirtation with Hasidism, because it seems contradictory to some of his other thoughts you described, like anarchism. I mean, to be part of a Hasidic sect is to live in a structure with rules and hierarchy and else. It's definitely not anarchistic. But what seems to me a closer way of thinking to Buber is someone like Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who also lived in Frankfurt, and he took Orthodox Judaism in a way that was applied and could live with modernity and the idea of Torah and Derech Eretz, and the Jew in the home and the German in the street. And I would have thought, I don't know if they knew I presume they knew each other, but I don't know whether they had an intellectual connection at all.
Okay, they did not know each other because Samson Raphael Hirsch died in 1888. Buber was born in 1878. Okay, so they did not know each other, but they knew of the book, of course. Everybody knows Samson Raphael Hirsch ideas. Okay, I would say I would not go as you suggest. Buber is very different from Hirsch. Very different. Doesn't mean that you cannot find areas in which they overlap, but the personality type, the insights, the passion. So what did he take from Hasidism? He clearly did not take the admiration and the adoration of the Rebbe. He did not. That's because he's a true anarchist. So he's not going to... Yeah, sure. another person. That for him will be a form of idolatry, I would say. What he took from Hasidism is this ecstatic moment. One, Buber's earliest work, I didn't put it on the first list, on the first slide, was ecstatic confessions. He was really interested in mysticism. And in Hasidism, he saw an actual community that has true ecstatic experiences. Real exuberance. That's what happens in Hasidic prayer. True exuberance. That's what appealed to him. But he's not going to be, he also ignores aspects of Hasidism. This is why Schoen really was very upset with Buber. Hasidism has systematic writings. Hasidism has structures. Hasidism has even hierarchies. Hasidism even has bureaucracies, right? Buber kind of ignored that. That's why Schoen said Buber was a bad historian of Hasidism. But it doesn't mean that he didn't get Hasidism at all. Without Buber's translations of those texts, people would not know about Hasidism in the West as much as they do know today. And I'm talking especially about non-Jews who have access to Hasidic texts. That's because of Buber and because of Paula, who helped him to translate into good German. So that's that. But on the whole, I agree that his relevance, if we look at this relevance to all aspects of intellectual life today is unbelievably powerful. And I suggest to every person, really in the room and online, to read at least one book either about Buber or by Buber and really expose, do yourself a service and expose yourself to his ideas and his personality. Do we have questions online? No? Okay.
Actually, can you ask for one more question?
Sure. Yeah.
Can you talk about, given his dislike for organization?
Yeah.
How did he fit his theology into what was becoming modern Judaism during his time?
Well, he, in some ways, he remains a minority position, right? He's always a critic. That he was a difficult man in that sense because it's hard to satisfy what he's really about. But he doesn't have to fit. I can say one thing. Because he was an educator, he actually created an educational institution, adult education in Israel, 1948 to 1954. There was kind of a teacher's college, so how to teach adults. So in that sense, Buber was not totally outside the structure. But basically, he sits home, writing books, communicating with people all over the world, traveling a lot. He traveled an awful lot, especially after World War II. He was the first Jewish intellectual to go to Germany after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, and accept an award from the German government. In other words, he could have said, no, I'm not going to Germany. I'm not touching this land anymore. After I've been basically forced out of it and after the horrors of the Holocaust. But he said, no. He said, I have to go. I have to show humanity a different way of being human. And that's what the I Thou message is all about. And it's up to us to choose how do we want to be in the world. How do we want to interact with other people? And he shows, it's kind of an invitation, if you wish to. It's kind of an aspiration. Most of us fail the aspiration, but that doesn't mean that aspiration is wrong. It just means that it's hard to go there, hard to accomplish it. So all of us in education, as much as I've been in this field for 50 years, so in education, that's what we do. We are always interacting within institutions, within a curriculum, within certain parameters, but we try to do something more than that. So I guess with that, let me just invite you to read more Buber and of course show up to next week's lecture, which will be about Soloveitchik, who is a very different personality type. So I'll see you all next week, same time.
Thank you.